Clara had always been an ambitious student. From the moment she enrolled in university, she was determined to excel in her field of paranormal studies. It wasn't long before she discovered an old building on campus known for its eerie history, the research building. The building was a maze of dark, narrow hallways and rooms that had been abandoned for decades, except for one particular room, Room 3, which housed the university's most mysterious and dangerous experiments. The room was notorious among students. Rumors of strange occurrences, disappearances, accidents, and strange sounds had plagued the building for years. Some students whispered that the room was cursed, while others claimed it was haunted by a spirit that had once been an experimental subject. But Clara, driven by her curiosity and thirst for knowledge, was not one to believe in superstitions. She saw the room as a challenge, an opportunity to uncover what truly lay hidden. One evening, she stayed late to continue working on a research paper about the history of paranormal phenomena. The library had closed, and she found herself alone in the dimly lit building. As she walked through the long, echoing hallways, she noticed a strange chill in the air, as though the building itself were alive and watching her. It was almost as if the very walls whispered her name. Curiosity led her to Room 3. The door was old and made of weathered wood, but there was something inviting about it, as if it had been waiting for her all along. She hesitated for a moment, but then pushed it open. The room was smaller than she had expected and filled with old, dusty equipment. In the far corner of the room, there was a desk with a single lamp on it, casting an eerie glow across the room. As Clara walked in, the door behind her slammed shut, almost as though it had been pushed by an unseen hand. She immediately felt a cold rush of air sweep through the room, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. At first, she thought it was just the building settling, but then the temperature dropped drastically. It became so cold that she could see her breath, even though it was a warm night outside. Suddenly, Clara heard faint footsteps in the hallway. She turned quickly, but no one was there. The silence that followed was suffocating. She walked toward the door, but when she tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. It felt as though something was holding it shut from the other side. Panic started to creep in as she desperately tried to force the door open, but remained locked. The lights flickered, and she heard something, or rather someone, whisper her name from the corner of the room. Clara spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the shadows, growing longer and darker with every passing second. She stepped back toward the desk and noticed an old photograph lying face down. She turned it over, her heart racing. The photograph was black and white, depicting the very same room, but something was off. In the background, standing next to a shelf, was a shadowy figure, almost transparent like a ghost. The figure was staring directly at the camera, its eyes hollow and empty. Clara's blood ran cold. She quickly tried to leave the room again, but as soon as she touched the door, the lights went out completely, plunging her into darkness. The temperature dropped even further, and Clara felt as though she could hear breathing in the room, slow, heavy, and labored. It wasn't her own. The door opened, but not because she touched it. It opened on its own, slowly, like something was beckoning her to enter. Clara hesitated but stepped forward. The room seemed to stretch before her. She could hear a faint sound now, like a child crying, but when she looked around, there was nothing. The room seemed to grow darker with every step she took. Then, out of the corner of her eye, Clara saw it. The shadowy figure from the photograph was standing in the corner of the room. It was no longer a vague shape. It was solid, towering over her. Its eyes locked onto hers, hollow and soulless. "Leave now," the figure whispered, though its voice was more of a growl. Clara turned to flee, but the door slammed shut again with a deafening crash. The figure began to move toward her, its footsteps slow and deliberate. With each step, Clara felt her heart racing, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She was trapped. There was nowhere to run. Desperation overcame her. With all her strength, Clara pushed against the door. It budged just enough for her to slip through, and she ran into the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. As she fled down the long corridor, She heard the footsteps behind her, always just a step away. When she finally reached the exit, she didn't stop running until she was outside, breathing the fresh air of the night. But that was just the beginning. Clara thought she had escaped, but from that night on, she felt a presence following her, like eyes watching her every move. And every time she closed her eyes, the shadowy figure from the room appeared in her dreams, always saying the same thing: "You can never escape me." At Grimwood University, there was a legend that had been passed down for generations. The students spoke in hushed tones about an underground library hidden beneath the campus, a place that had been sealed off for years. No one knew how to access it, and no one dared to try. According to the stories, the library was not like any other. It was home to books that were cursed and some of the most dangerous knowledge in the world. It was said that long ago, the headmaster of the university, a man named Professor Redmond, had made a pact with dark forces in exchange for forbidden knowledge. He had delved too deep into occult practices, and his greed for power had led to his disappearance. Some said he died in the library. Others said he was trapped there, bound to its shelves for eternity. Javier, a curious and adventurous student, had always been intrigued by the stories. He didn't believe in such things. He considered them to be nothing more than myths meant to scare new students. But there was something about this particular legend that caught his attention. He became obsessed with it. Late at night, he would search the library for any hint of the hidden entrance, any clue that could lead him to the forbidden library below. One rainy evening, when the campus was quiet and empty, Javier finally found it. A hidden door in the basement of the university's oldest building. The door was covered in dust, almost as if it hadn't been opened in centuries. With trembling hands, he turned the old, rusted knob and stepped inside. The air inside was thick and oppressive, like stepping into another world entirely. The underground library was vast, its shelves filled with ancient, tattered books. The dim light from his flashlight cast eerie shadows across the room. The smell of mildew and decay filled his nostrils as he walked deeper into the labyrinth of books. As he explored further, Javier began to feel a sense of unease. It wasn't just the cold. It was as though something was watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. He felt eyes on his back, even though he was alone. He tried to ignore the creeping sensation and continued his search. But as he walked deeper into the library, the air grew colder and the shadows darker. Suddenly, he stumbled upon an old book lying on a pedestal in the center of the room. It was bound in what appeared to be leather, and its pages were yellowed with age. As he opened the book, he saw strange symbols etched into the paper. The words seemed to writhe before his eyes, as though they were alive, moving on the page. A cold gust of wind blew through the room, and Javier heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned quickly, but no one was there. His heart began to race. He heard the footsteps again, closer this time. He dropped the book and turned to leave, but the entrance had vanished. The shelves stretched on forever, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. The shadows in the library began to move. They twisted and grew, forming shapes that seemed to lurk just beyond the edge of his vision. Javier felt the weight of their gaze on him, and he knew he wasn't alone anymore. It was then that he saw him, the figure in the dark cloak, standing at the far end of the library. The figure's face was obscured by a hood, but Javier could feel its presence, cold and malevolent. The figure took a step toward him, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "You should never have come here," the figure whispered, its voice low and rasping. Javier tried to run, but the library seemed to stretch on endlessly, the walls closing in around him. The shadows followed him, reaching out like tendrils, pulling at his legs. He couldn't escape. The figure moved closer, and with each step it took, Javier felt his strength drain from him. The last thing he heard was the figure's voice in his ear, whispering one final warning: "You belong to the library now." Mariana had always been fascinated by the mind. As a psychology student, she spent countless hours studying the workings of the brain, particularly how dreams could influence reality. When she heard about an experimental study on lucid dreaming being conducted at her university, she knew she had to be a part of it. Dr. Sinclair, the professor in charge, was a charismatic but mysterious figure. He promised the participants that they would be able to experience total control over their dreams. The idea of being able to shape her dreams and explore the subconscious intrigued Mariana, so she eagerly signed up for the study. The experiment was conducted in a dark, sterile room filled with monitors and wires. Each participant was hooked up to a machine that would record their brain activity during sleep. The idea was simple. Through a series of carefully controlled techniques, the participants would enter a state of lucid dreaming where they could consciously control the events of their dreams. The first night was uneventful. Mariana found herself in a peaceful meadow with a soft breeze blowing through the tall grass. It felt serene and beautiful, a perfect dream. But when she tried to wake up, something went wrong. She couldn't move. She couldn't wake up. It was as though her body was frozen in place, and no matter how hard she tried to wake herself, she remained trapped in the dream. The dream shifted, becoming darker and more distorted. She was no longer in the meadow, but in a long, dark hallway. The walls seemed to close in on her, and she felt the weight of something terrible watching her from the shadows. She turned to run, but the hallway stretched on forever. As she moved through the endless corridor, Mariana encountered strange figures, faceless, contorted shapes that lurked in the darkness, always just out of sight. They whispered her name, their voices echoing in her mind. Each time she tried to wake up, the dream became more real, more suffocating. On the second night, Mariana tried again, but this time, the dream took a darker turn. She found herself trapped in a room, locked in a cage with no escape. The shadows outside the cage seemed to move and twist, forming shapes that were not quite human. They reached through the bars, trying to pull her closer. Their touch was ice cold, like death itself. Mariana's fear intensified, and she realized that something was horribly wrong with the experiment. The more she tried to escape, the more the dream seemed to feed on her fear, growing stronger and more terrifying. By the third night, Mariana was no longer sure if she was dreaming or awake. She was losing track of reality, unable to distinguish between the dream world and the waking world. She would wake up only to find that the world around her felt distorted, as though it had been shaped by the nightmare she had experienced. The more Mariana delved into the dream, the more she realized that the experiment had gone far beyond what anyone could control. The boundaries between dream and reality had become blurred, and she could feel the shadows closing in on her. There was no escape, and then, one night, she saw it, a dark, hooded figure standing at the foot of her bed. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and it reached out for her. She screamed, but no sound came out. As the figure touched her, the world around her shattered, and everything went dark.